Why Rodri left Manchester City for Barcelona. Rodri just left Manchester City for Barcelona. Not after falling out with the club. Not because City wanted to sell him. And not because he had stopped being one of the best midfielders in the world. Manchester City actually allowed their Ballon d'Or-winning midfielder to leave for around £65.4 million, with Rodri signing for Barcelona until 2030. And that is what makes this transfer so strange. Because Rodri had become almost impossible to replace at Manchester City. In 6 seasons, he played 298 games, won 14 major trophies, lifted 4 Premier League titles, won the Champions League, and became the first City player to win the Ballon d'Or. So why walk away now? Why leave a club where he had already achieved almost everything? And why choose Barcelona when Real Madrid were also interested? Stay until the end and you'll see how Rodri's final season at City, his contract situation, Barcelona's midfield project, his connection with Spain, and even one reported conversation with Pep Guardiola all point toward the same answer. There is one part of this transfer that makes the whole story even more surprising. Rodri wasn't simply choosing Barcelona over Manchester City. He may have been choosing the final chapter of his career. To understand why Rodri left, you have to understand what Manchester City became with him. When Rodri arrived from Atletico Madrid in 2019, he wasn't immediately the superstar we know today. He was the midfielder expected to eventually replace Fernandinho. But under Pep Guardiola, something much bigger happened. Rodri became the player who controlled everything. When City needed to slow the game down, Rodri controlled it. When they needed to escape pressure, Rodri found the pass. When defenders pushed forward, Rodri protected them. And when City were losing control of a match, the ball almost always ended up at his feet. His importance became impossible to ignore. The clearest example came in the 2022-23 season. Manchester City won the treble. And in the Champions League final against Inter Milan, Rodri scored the goal that delivered the trophy. That moment changed his status forever. He wasn't just Guardiola's midfielder anymore. When defenders pushed forward, Rodri protected them. And when City were losing control of a match, the ball almost always ended up at his feet. His importance became impossible to ignore. The clearest example came in the 2022-23 season. Manchester City won the treble. And in the Champions League final against Inter Milan, Rodri scored the goal that delivered the trophy. That moment changed his status forever. He wasn't just Guardiola's midfielder anymore. He was one of the most important players in world football. Then came another historic achievement. In 2024, Rodri won the Ballon d'Or. And by 2026, he had gone even further. Rodri captained Spain to the World Cup title and was named the tournament's best player. At that point, almost every elite club would have wanted him. But there was a problem. Rodri's Manchester City contract was approaching its final year, and City were entering a new era. Pep Guardiola's legendary period at the club had ended. Enzo Maresca was now taking charge. Several important players were also leaving. And suddenly, the Manchester City Rodri had helped build was changing around him. City wanted him to stay. Real Madrid wanted him. Barcelona wanted him. And Rodri had a decision to make. The question was no longer whether he could succeed at Manchester City. The question was where he wanted the next chapter of his career to happen. And that is where Barcelona entered the story. Barcelona's perfect timing. Barcelona didn't simply see Rodri as another superstar. They saw something much more specific, a midfielder who could become the foundation of their next great team. Rodri was 30 years old, entering the final stage of his prime, and had already proven that he could control the biggest matches in Europe. For Barcelona, that was exactly the type of player they needed. And there was another reason. Rodri understood Barcelona's football. Possession, control, positioning, short combinations, controlling space instead of simply chasing the ball. This wasn't a random transfer. It made footballing sense. And the more Barcelona pushed, the more difficult it became for City to keep Rodri. The first major offer reportedly wasn't enough. Manchester City rejected Barcelona's initial bid of around £38.5 million and wanted considerably more. Barcelona came back. City eventually accepted a package, reported at around £65.4 million. And suddenly, the transfer that had seemed almost impossible was real. But there was still one enormous problem. Rodri had another option, and that option was Real Madrid. The twist, Real Madrid. For a Spanish superstar, Real Madrid is almost impossible to ignore. Rodri had grown up in Spain. He knew La Liga. He had already established himself as one of the country's greatest midfielders, and Real Madrid were looking for midfield quality. So for a moment, the obvious destination seemed to be Madrid, but Rodri didn't choose them. He chose Barcelona. And that decision tells us something important. This wasn't simply about joining the biggest possible club. It was about finding the environment that Rodri believed suited his football. Reports from Spain claimed that Rodri ultimately preferred Barcelona's style and vision. And one report went even further. It claimed Rodri asked Pep Guardiola for advice before making his decision. According to that report, Guardiola encouraged him toward Barcelona because he believed the club's footballing philosophy suited Rodri. If that report is accurate, the irony is incredible. The man who turned Rodri into a superstar at Manchester City may have helped him decide where to go next. But there was another factor that may have mattered even more. Something Manchester City could never give him: the Spain connection. Barcelona offered Rodri something deeply personal: a return home. He had spent years away from Spain. He had conquered England. He had conquered Europe. He had won the Ballon d'Or. He had won the World Cup. But Barcelona gave him the chance to return to Spanish football while still playing at the highest level. And the timing was perfect. Barcelona already had several Spanish stars around him: Lamine Yamal, Pedri, Dani Olmo, Gavi, Pau Cubars. And after Spain's World Cup triumph, Rodri was no longer simply another Spanish player. He was the captain of the national team and one of the faces of Spanish football. Now imagine the midfield: Rodri behind Pedri, Dani Olmo moving between the lines, Yamal creating from the right. Suddenly, Barcelona weren't just buying Rodri. They were building an environment where he could continue playing the football he already understood. But then we reach the biggest contradiction in the entire story. If Rodri loved City so much, why leave at all? The real reason City became vulnerable. The answer may have less to do with Rodri wanting to escape Manchester, and more to do with the fact that Manchester City was changing. Rodri's contract was due to expire in 2027. That meant City had a choice: extend his contract and keep him through the next era, or sell him while his market value was still enormous. And City eventually chose the second option. The fee was substantial, but for a player of Rodri's importance, it was still a fascinating decision, because City weren't simply selling a midfielder. They were closing the book on one of the defining eras in the club's history. Rodri left with 298 appearances and 14 major trophies. And now City had to replace the player around whom their midfield had been built. They had already brought in Elliot Anderson for a reported £116 million and were looking at further midfield reinforcements.